You want to go one at a time?
Sure.
One at a time? Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one.
Oh, deuce, no. Oh, you have a pair. Nice. Nice. What a sweat.
We about to change the game. We out here taking names. Let our voices rise. Let them reach the skies. We about to change the game. We out here taking names. Let our voices rise. Let them reach the skies.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of Vader Poker. We're still continuing our bankroll challenge. We have gotten to the 5K mark. We're exactly $5,000. That's after rake or time, whatever you want to call it, membership fees, things like that. So we are exactly halfway, and we're trying to get over that hump and get to that 10K mark. You know, it's kind of funny. Poker is a lot like recruiting. When I was recruiting, one thing I learned was, you had to get to 5 consultants, working for you on assignment. When you really started getting like a good feel for the money and how good recruiting could be, when it came to the commission side. But the problem was growing from 5 to 10 was always very tough because you had to maintain that 5. So what happens is you get to 5 and then you lose 1 or 2. And then you get 2 or 3 on and then you lose 1 or 2. And so eventually you finally get to 10 and then you maintain 10, get to 15. And so we're taking the same approach here with poker. And I think it's funny how the two really do correlate when it comes to the grind of, placing people, staffing, and playing poker. Last night's session was, although not a great one monetarily speaking, it actually was one of the most fun sessions I've had in a long time. Everybody was jovial. In fact, I moved tables once, so I did 2 different tables, and both tables, everybody was jovial, having a good time. Part of that was because of one of the regulars. Guy was very chatty, very personable, and wanted people to have a good time. He was buying drinks, 1942s for the table, and just lots of laughs, lots of smiles, and a lot of fun. Even though we technically had like $16 an hour for our hourly, so not great, and definitely not the pace we need to be on. So today we're gonna try to keep growing that, and you'll notice probably somewhere that I'm somewhere different. I'm at my mom's house. My AC unit went out again, and the good news is she's only about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes away from TCH, so we can play probably a couple extra hours than we normally would. So hopefully get a little bit more hourly in today because we don't have to drive so far at night, and then we can just come back here, crash, get up, go to work. That's the plan. All right, y'all, you know what time it is. It's time to grind.
In our first hand at the table, we have 2 limpers on our right. We look down at pocket 7s, so we decide to bump it up to $20. The small blind calls and 1 limper calls, everybody else folds, and we're heading to this flop 3-handed. And the flop comes Jack 8-6 with 2 diamonds. It's not the best flop for us, to be honest, but at least we have a backdoor straight draw and backdoor flush draw, just in case our pair of 7s isn't good. If this were more multi-way, I would certainly check it back, but being that it's only 3-handed, I do think my 7s need a little bit of protection, so I decide to lead for a 3rd pot, as I typically do multi-way. They both snap fold, and we win our first pot of the night. All right, in our next hand at the table, we look down at pocket 10s. We have 1 limper this time, so we bump it up to $15. Once again, the small blind calls and 1 limper calls. So now we're headed once again to a flop 3-handed. And the flop comes down 7-6-6 rainbow. It's a paired board. It's not too bad. The small blind shouldn't have a lot of 6s. The limper could certainly have like a 5-6 suited or ace-6 or something like that. But hey, it's a paired board. They both check to us. I think it's smart to go ahead and start betting. Our 10s do need a little protection. I don't want to see a jack, a queen, a king, or an ace on the turn. So of course we're going to bet. And as usual, we bet 1/3 pot when it's multi-way. The small blind decides to call, and then the limper raises to $45. Now, it's not that big of a raise. It's certainly a raise a 6 could do, absolutely. But at this point, it's kind of hard to fold pocket 10s to a check raise. They could have 8-9, they could have a 7. Typically in these 1-2 games, I will say an exploitative read here would probably just be to fold. Most 1-2 players, if they're not like pros or regulars or something like that, aren't really check raising with a 7 here. They're just going to check call, and they're probably going to check call with an 8-9, given that there's not a flush draw. So I am a little concerned, and I'm just going to call. The small blind at this point decides, hey, the jig is up. They're going to fold too, and now we're headed to the turn, heads up. So the turn card is an ace. So an ace isn't really the best card, but it's not the worst card either. Like, I'm probably not calling a check raise on the flop with an ace high hand there against most of the population that doesn't really check raise bluff too much. So I think when the ace comes and our opponent checks, good idea to check behind. So we check. The river brings the 8 of diamonds, which of course could bring in a straight, but if they have 8, 9, well, now they have a pair of 8s, and our opponent checks to us once again. So I think we can go for some thin value here. Now, if I'm not betting here, I think I am making a pretty large mistake, but once I bet small here and our opponent check raises, I think this is the point where I should probably be folding. But I just kept thinking, what checks turn and checks river? Like if I just check behind, he doesn't get paid if he has, say, a 6, but an ace 6 does make sense, could have a full house. It's just rare for someone to check turn and then check raise river. But I will say check raise rivers are very rarely bluffs, and so that's probably why I should have folded these pocket 10s. But I make the call, our opponent shows a 6, we lose the hand. On to the next one. All right, in this next one, we look down at ace 8 offsuit in the hijack, and we have one limper in a straddle pot to our right. I think this is a good opportunity with ace 8 offsuit to raise, given that it's a pretty passive game, but I don't know why I chose to overlimp. I know if I overlimp like ace 4, ace 6s, those type of hands are going to overlimp too, and I can certainly, get some good value from those type of hands. But for some reason, and I didn't have it in my notes, but I decided to limp. So we limp. The big blind decides to come along, and the straddler checks. So hey, not a bad situation considering we misplayed this already pre-flop. And the flop is actually pretty favorable for us. It comes ace 6, 3 rainbow, and unless somebody has ace 6 or ace 3, overlimped with ace 9, which is definitely possible. Ace 10 or better usually raises. So I'm not anticipating them to have those hands, so I feel pretty good about my ace 8. And when it checks to us, we decide to bet $10. The big blind and the straddle decide to come along for the ride, and the limper decides to fold. But the turn, it comes actually pretty favorable for us unless somebody has like a queen 6 suited, but it's the queen of hearts. Doesn't really bring any backdoor flush draws. I feel pretty confident about my ace again, and I'm hoping that both players have a weaker ace and decide to make the call, or like a 4-5 or something like that, So I think it's a good idea to bet. So we decide to bet 35, and they both call again. All right, a little bit worrisome, not gonna lie. So now we're still three-handed going to the river. And the river is another ace. Hey, now we tripped up and we should have the best trips. Unless, again, somebody flopped, say, pocket 3s or overlimped with pocket 6s. We feel pretty good about our hand, right? So we feel pretty good about this river. And when we bet 100, the small blind check raise jams. And that's a pretty strong check raise jam. So now I am really worried about ace 9, ace 3, ace 6. I highly doubt ace queen, or 3s full or 6s full. So I tank for a long time. In the end, it's 125 to win like, what, $300-$400. So we go ahead and make the call, and our opponent has a lesser ace, and we take this one down because the 8 plays. All right, on to the next one. You want to do a $10 run out? He folds? Yeah? Just $10? Yeah, for fun?
Yeah, $10 run out.
And we'll sweat it at the end together.
Yeah.
Did you look?
Nope. All right, you want to go one at a time?
Sure.
One at a time? Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah.
That's a good one.
Oh, deuce, no. Oh, you have a pair. Nice. Nice. What a sweat.
In this next hand of note, we have a few limpers on our right, and the small blind decides to raise to $15. We look down at 9-8 suited, 9-8 of clubs, and normally I would like to 3-bet this hand in this type of configuration, but when it's the small blind who's raising, that's pretty strong. All they had to do was call $1 and see the flop, right? Tends to be pretty strong, so instead of 3-betting, I think it makes sense to call here. We're getting a pretty good price. We're in the big blind. We make the call, and sure enough, one of the limpers calls. So we're headed to the flop 3-handed. And the flop comes down Jack, Jack 8 with 2 spades. So not a bad flop necessarily for us. We do flop 2 pair, but there's a lot of Jack X, a lot of like Queen 10s, Queen 9s, hands like that I'm just not that comfortable against. We're out of position, so we decide to check after the small blind checks, and it checks around. So we feel pretty good about our 8s at this point. The turn is a queen of clubs, which is a good card, but it's also a bad card for us, right? There is a chance one of these players might have a queen. So when the small blind checks, we check again, and the button bets $20. Well, the button could just be betting because everybody checked twice. They could have a queen. So we decided to do a little bit of a mergey bet here. It's a mix between a value bet and a bluff. If he has a queen, this check raise will certainly get him to fold a queen. Looks like we have a jack or something like that, possibly even queen jack, and a queen might fold. If they don't have a queen and they have, say, king 10 or something like that, well, I think certainly they're going to fold. And who knows, if they do call, and if they have a straight draw and the turn brings the straight for them but brings the flush for us, we can give them a lot of reverse implied odds if they do call this check raise here. So we decide to go ahead and check raise, and folds. And we take it down. All right, in this next hand, we have a limper on our right, but I didn't see the limper, so I guess I wasn't paying attention. So when we look down at queen jack of spades, we should be raising it to $15 here, but a little bit of an error. We raised to $10. Luckily, not everybody calls. Everybody folds back to the limper, and the limper is the only one who makes the call. So that actually worked out for us, even though we shortchanged our raise just a little bit. And the flop comes ace jack 7 with 1 spade. So it's not the best flop for us because we flop middle pair. And when our opponent checks to us, certainly we could bet it. It's an ace high board, but a lot of people do limp call with like ace 4s, things like that. So when the player checks to us, I think it makes sense to check back here. The only card I'm afraid of really on the turn is a king, right? So a queen, gives us 2 pair, not that worried about that. 4 cards in the deck, not that big a deal. I think I can check back here. Also protect my check back range. The turn brings the 6 of hearts, pretty much a brick, and the limper leads out for $20. So that's interesting and not something you typically see. So now I am a little worried about ace X. They did seem interested in the pot when the flop came down. And so what are we going to do besides call? I don't think raising makes a lot of sense. I am a little worried, like one could talk us into folding here because of just this type of player profile, and I don't expect them to be leading out a lot of boards here. We decide to call. The river brings another ace, which actually is a decent card. That's less ace X that they have in their hands. Certainly a lot less combos of like ace X suited that maybe this player might limp with. When the player leads for $85, which is a pretty big bet for the pot size, and again, for these stakes, we're looking at like almost a 50 big blind bet here. So I think, that needs to be taken into consideration. But after some tanking for a little while, I don't see how I can fold as played here. I make a very reluctant call, and our opponent has a baby ace and wins the pot. Should have folded. Sometimes even when you're playing exploitative poker, you still get caught up in a little bit of GTO. So maybe now it's time to take a little break.
Okay, we're on our first break. There's a bomb pot going on right now, so I got a few minutes. Thought I'd come chat with y'all just a little bit. It's been a weird session. Most of the hands I've won, I've had to kind of bluff or turn into bluffs. The 10s, obviously those were no good, and bad call there. Queen Jack with the ace thing, it's just I've been in weird situations where I've had to call down. It's just been weird spots, when I have value hands. Yeah, but I moved tables because even though I was running good at that first table, the table was like a bunch of regs. There's just better tables here. There's more fun tables. And so I moved to a fun table. And I think that's the best move, no matter how good I'm running at one table. It doesn't last forever. So we're heading back in. Bomb pot's got to be over. Break time's over. See if we can keep running the stack up. Time to grind.
First hand after break, we finally pick up a big hand.
Ooh, piece of candy.
And it's 2 red kings, the Cowboys. Of course, after 2 limpers, we're going to raise it up to our typical $20. So that's what we do. And only one of the limpers calls. So we're going to this flop heads up. All right, I'll take that. And the flop comes pretty great. It comes jack 6-5 with 2 spades. So being that we have 2 red kings on this type of flop, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to check back here when our opponent checks to us. So of course we're going to fire a bet, and we fire $25. So it's about a half pot bet, given that, could have straight draw, could have flush draw, very possible, could have a jack, and we kind of want to start maximizing that value now a little bit. But when we bet, our opponent folds, and we take down a small one with pocket kings. Guess I could have just had 7 deuce. Oh well, on to the next one. All right, in this next one, it's a straddled pot, and it folds to us in the hijack, and we look down at queen 10 offsuit. Of course, we're going to raise it here. I typically raise about 3 to 4x, somewhere in that range when it's a straddled pot and we're the initial opener. So I decided to opt for $20 in this spot, being that we have queen 10 offsuit. If it was suited, I think I could raise to 15 or 17. I think that's fine, but a little extra fold equity kind of goes a long way. So we decide to raise to $20. And only the straddle calls. And the flop is very favorable for us. It comes queen, queen 3 with 2 hearts. So when the straddler checks, we kind of hold all the cards here. All we're afraid of, quote unquote, is a flush draw. So I think it's a good spot for us to check back. So that's what we do. Now on the turn, 8 of hearts comes. Now there's a big flush draw out there. Any one card could have a heart, could beat us on the river if a heart comes. Definitely want to start putting money in the pot now. So when the straddle checks to us, I think it makes sense here to bet about half pot, $20. So that's what we do. And the straddler decides to call. Guess they just hate money. The river is the deuce of spades. So, not a heart. If it was a heart, there's definitely 100% of the chance we lose this pot unless it's the 10 of hearts. When it comes a blank, our opponent checks to us, we bet, they decide to fold, and now we're moving on to the next hand. Hey, we'll take down another pot with queen 10 off. Not a bad result. All right, in this next hand, we have a few limpers on our right and the small blind complete. And of course, when we look down at jack 10 offsuit, what else is there to do but bump it up to 200? No, I'm just kidding. Why would I do that? We check back our option and we flop the joint, ace, king, queen with 2 diamonds, and we have the jack of diamonds. So we kind of hold all the cards. cards, but people do like to limp in with those baby aces. So I think we're going to get 2 streets of value here at the most. I think let's start now to build a little bit of a pot. So we bet $10 after the small blind checks, and only 1 limper calls, small blind folds. The turn is the 10 of diamonds. Again, we hold all the cards here. The only thing we don't really block is ace X of diamonds. I guess it makes sense to check here. And again, we're only going to get 2 streets, so maybe we get a river bet if we check here, and the river's not that scary. So we check, our opponent checks behind. Now the river is another queen, so now the board is paired. We lead out for 10. The limper decides to min raise to 20, which is a little bit scary, I guess. I'm not going to lie. So I didn't really know what to think of this. I thought if they have queen 10, they've got us. They could have a flush with the ace X of diamonds or limped in with 6-7 of diamonds. I don't block that either, right? Stuff like that. I don't know. I guess we don't get called by better if I come over the top for, say, 100 or 60 or something. So I go ahead and just make the call. Sure enough, they have a queen, and we win the hand. On to the next one. All right, we've got a really, really weird situation that happens here. So this actually involves a strange configuration with button, with ourselves in the small blind, and with the big blind. So there's a couple limpers to our right. The button decides to raise to $12, which isn't really that big of a raise in this game. Usually people make it 15 to 20. So when we look down at ace jack offsuit in the small blind, I would have 3-bet this anyways, given this configuration, but we go ahead and 3-bet to 50. A little bit bigger than 3x, but not quite as big as 4x, because I want ace 10 to call ace 9, something like that, especially if they're suited. But much to our surprise, the big blind decides to cold 4-bet to $100. Now, this guy is a studied player. He's a regular. He was actually the same player that was in the $10 run out before. Really nice guy. We've been talking a lot. He seems to know what he's doing. I really don't want to play ace jack offsuit to him out of position, even though it's for a min click 4-bet to $100. I decided to make the fold, the whole table, because like, what? Oh my gosh, I can't believe you folded to $50. I actually showed him the hand and I said, I think you have me. He immediately goes, I do. And I folded. So if you didn't, hey, good bluff. On to the next one. All right, who's ready for a bluff? We're in the cutoff. We look down at Jack 10 offsuit, and we're going to make our standard open when it folds to us to $10. Well, everybody folds except the big blind, who's a regular. I've played with him a couple times. He's a thinking player. He's in the big blind, so he could have a pretty wide range here. So when the flop comes ace 6-4, it's pretty good for our range. It's ace high. I'm typically going to bet an ace high hand. When he checks to us, I think it makes sense to bet half pot, as I typically do heads up. So I bet half pot, and our opponent calls. Okay, you could have a 6, you could have a 4, you could have a weak ace, he could have 5-7, hands like that. So when the turn comes the 9 of spades, feels like a brick, unless for some reason he has 6-9 suited or something like that. So when he checks to us again, I think it makes sense to size up here a bit to get a fold out of a 6 or a 4. So I make a pot size bet, and our opponent thinks a little bit before making the call. Now, this has me a little concerned because I don't think he's going to call with a 4. He might have a 6 that's pretty sticky, or he could have a weak ace, or still have some type of 5-7 of spades, maybe with the backdoor flush draw, something like that. So when the river's the 9 of diamonds and our opponent checks once again, I'm really trying to get that sticky 6 to fold. I really think there's a chance he could fold a weak ace if I make a really large bet here. So I go into the tank for just a few seconds before deciding to make a bet of 100 into the $120 pot. And our opponent goes into the tank for quite some time, decides to make the fold, and shows an ace. So we did in fact get him to fold one of those baby aces. Whoo! I don't often triple barrel, but when I do, our opponent tank folds. Sounds so dumb. Under the gun opens for $10, and it folds to us on the button with ace-8 suited. I think this is an okay opportunity to flat. If I was in the blinds, I would definitely flat. I usually like 3-betting, similar hands like this in a cash game, but when it's under the gun, I think it makes sense just to flat here. So I decided to go ahead and flat, and only the big blind comes along. The flop is actually pretty decent for us, I'd say. It comes ace-8-8. We smash this board, hitting a full house, and it checks to us. Well, we hold all the cards here, so I don't know why I'm going to bet. So I guess another ace could call us, but again, we hold all the cards. So the chances of that, pretty slim. I think it makes sense to check, so I check back. Again, protecting our check back range. Why not? The turn brings the 4 of clubs. So really not that much of a card. It's pretty much a brick. So our opponents check to us once again, and now we got to start putting some money in the pot here, build the pot up. I'm not just going to check to the river here. So I bet $20, and the big blind decides to check raise to 60. All right, music to my ears, baby. So when under the gun folds, I don't see what else we could do here besides call. I I think raising just gives away our hand here. And if I call and they have an ace, they're certainly going to bet the river. If they have an 8, they're absolutely going to bet the river. So I think calling here makes a lot of sense. Keep their bluffs in, 6-5s, 7-5, stuff like that. So when the board double pairs on the river with the 4, our opponent leads out for 105, and he's only got about, I don't know, maybe close to 3. But I think there's nothing left to do here but jam all in. I could min click it, I suppose, but if they're going to call a min click, they're going to call a jam at these stack depths. So I go ahead and jam it. Our opponent tanks for a long time. He finally just hems and haws and goes, well, I guess you got an 8, and decides to make the fold. But I think we made the maximum on this hand given how we played it. I think if we raise flop, they likely fold given that they folded river anyways. If we bet flop, certainly we get a call, but maybe they don't raise turn and maybe we don't get in a big pot on the river. So I think I played it just fine, and I think we got pretty much the maximum value given the situation. So, all right, let's go to the next hand. In this next hand, it's a straddled pot, and it folds to us in the cutoff, and we look down at Jack 10 of clubs. So of course we're going to raise this to $15. Again, standard 3 to 4x in these straddled pot situations. So we open to 15, small blind calls, the big blind folds, and the straddle calls. Again, pretty typical. The flop comes 9 high, 9-4 deuce, really disconnected, but there is one club, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to see bet. It's only 9 high, it's pretty disconnected. We do have a backdoor straight draw flush draw, we do have overcards, so when they both check to us, we bet a third pot as we usually do in a multi-way situation, and they both snap fold faster than Thanos. We pick up another big hand, our second big hand of the night, and it's, again, 2 big red cards, 2 red queens. Love it. And we've got a limper on our right. So of course we're going to raise to our typical $15. So that's what we do. The small blind calls, big blind calls, and the limper folds, which was actually kind of unexpected. So we're headed to the flop 3-handed. And the flop's great for us. It comes 8 high with 2 hearts. Pretty good flop. So when both opponents check to us, with the queen of hearts, I could get on board with checking back here. However, the small blind was just giving it away. He had reloaded 3 or 4 different times, always short buying for around 100. So he's just kind of giving it away. So I really wanted to maximize my value here and hopefully get 3 streets from that opponent. So we go ahead and bet our third pot bet, and both opponents call. Okay, could be flush draws, could be an 8, 7, something like that. The turn I absolutely hate. It's the 8 of hearts. Now we do have the queen of hearts, which is a good thing, but it is only the third nut draw in this point in time, so I don't love that. And one of these opponents could have an 8. I'm really actually thinking maybe the big blind does. I don't think the small blind should have a ton of 8s. So when they both check to me, I think it makes sense to check back. The river is a brick. It's a deuce of clubs. The small blind decides to lead for $30. I don't think he's very strong. He looked like he was just betting to bet, reluctantly kind of put in the chips. The big blind tanked for quite some time and decided to make the call as well. They could be making the call with some type of 7, with some type of other pair or something like that, knowing that the small blind is bluffing. This is the same guy that folded his ace to me before. So when I see that, I decide to make the overcall, and let's hear the action.
You have an 8?
Was that suited? King 8 suited? It wasn't?
End of the session, not a bad session. Profit of $300. We are now at $5,300 for the bankroll, so that's pretty good. Good to have at least one buy-in over, so I feel like maintaining the 5 now should hopefully be a little bit easier, but we'll see, because you know how this game can go. I could be up 300 and down 600 real quick. So not a bad session. I'll take it, considering I couldn't get a value hand to hold up. The jacks didn't hold, couldn't get the queens to hold. 10s, like, seems like basically if I had a value hand, couldn't get it to hold up, but when I was bluffing, it all got through, so. One might say I should just bluff all the time, maybe. You know, if those queens hold, the jacks hold, the 10s hold, I probably have, instead of a 300 profit, 600 to 900 range. So it is what it is, but hey, if we ain't bluffing, we wouldn't have won shit today. So the ace 8 actually was a pretty good hand. I'm not going to be playing for the next 4 days. So I have my son Thursday through Sunday, so I won't be playing during this weekend, but we'll be back at it Monday, and we'll be back on the grind trying to get together that stack for our bankroll, 10K. We're halfway, gotta keep it going. Maintain 5, get to 10, that's the goal. All right, y'all, peace.